everyone. Welcome back to another Fireside Chat. This is our Fireside Chat 41. And this time, we were discussing among ourselves what are some of the key practices that we use or techniques that we use, some of the ones that we like and dislike. And domain driven design always come to mind, right? So when you talk about design and modeling, and then we were asking, like, is it really worth the effort? Because, like, I believe that all of us have some sort of, sometimes even a different understanding of what domain-driven design means. So there is a lot of confusion in there, what it really is. Also, how do you apply, right? And we see quite often see the side effects of its application. Sometimes good side effects, sometimes bad side effects. And then we say, well, is it really worth the effort? This is what we would like today. But before, like to discuss today, but before we start, as always, as you are already here, so if you enjoy those chats, please subscribe to the channel so you are notified. We are always doing the lives, the Fireside Chat live now. So you are subscribed and there is a new one coming up. And also, it's an opportunity for you to join us, see everything else that we are doing in terms of other content, and also interact with us. So during this episode, I really expect your collaboration. So this is a sometimes controversial topic. So send us your questions, your comments, and yeah, so be part of the discussion. So back to the topic, domain-driven design. So I think that I'll start saying, explain what I understand by domain-driven design, right? So I think that that's probably what I would like. For me, domain-driven design is a body of knowledge. This is how I see domain-driven design. It's a body of knowledge that started in 2004 with the Blue Book by Eric Evans, and since then it evolved. A lot of other people joined the discussion, communities were created, new concepts were introduced, more books were published, like von Vernon published the Red Book and the Green Book. So a lot of people contributed with evolutions. But for me, is domain-driven design is a body of knowledge focused on modeling systems using what we call the ubiquitous language, making sure that the systems, they reflect how organizations work. So this is, for me, in a nutshell, this is what domain-driven design is. The devil is in the details, right? So how do we get to this state? And guys, what do you think about domain-driven design? Is it worth the effort?
Well, I would like to add one more thing to that, which is that in part that design is to reflect the domain, no, or the business. So the part of what I think was quite interesting, no, using the ubiquitous language, the idea was to have the domain be represented by the code, so to speak, no, and that drive everything else. And the thing that I think was quite interesting here is that before that, you would start like defining the database, no, or defining, how am I going to store stuff, and then from there you would kind of drive out what you know parts you wanted and so on. And this has an approach that starts with the business in mind and how the business is supposed to function, instead of trying to fit the software, no, or try to make those two fit without thinking about it, so to speak, right? And I think that's quite an interesting part around what it brings to the table. Um, so yeah, back to your question, which I don't remember very well.
Is it
Could
worth
you
it?
repeat?
Is it
Is,
worth
is
it?
it worth the
Is
effort?
it worth it? Yeah. Okay. So this is. I personally think that it depends.
Oh, no. How imaginative of you,
Because
dude.
no, the thing is that let me
It's
explain.
the first, it
Like if you
depends
have a
of the
domain,
night.
if you have a complex domain, I think if you have a complex domain where you can actually you need to have that understanding between the business and technology in order to make sure that everything fits. Yes, you do need it. It will make things easier for you. Yeah, overall, I like the success of whatever it is that you're building. uh, you will at least collaborate better, so to speak, or at least that's the plan, no. But when it's something that it's quite simple, or when it's something that it's not really like a very complex domain, there might be pre-made solutions that you can just pick and adapt and so on. Just use what you have in there, right? Like I wouldn't use, I don't know, domain driven design for a blog. You know what I mean? Like that's something that it's a problem that's been solved lots of times. It's quite well known. No, there's a lot of off the shelf stuff. If you want to customize it or whatever, you'll be able to do that as well. So again, it's not a clear cut for me, because how complex is complex enough that it requires that kind of thinking, no, or that kind of approach. But in general, you know 90% of the cases are not that bad, let's say. Especially, I don't know, if you go into some of the let's say the architectural types, or patterns that are associated with the like things like CQRS and this kind of stuff, which try to solve all the kind of problems that a lot of systems don't have, but you're still putting it in there just in case, at some point we grow so much, and we're not scalable enough or whatever. So all of that premature optimization can happen very quickly if you go down that route, and you're not kind of paying attention to what the tool is
Mhm.
let's say advising you to do, which is how to think about building the software. In my opinion, how to think about business, or more than using some particular patterns, or some particular architectures that are associated with it, which is what a lot of people do, right?
So Mesh, like Jose has been taking the point of the complexity and when to apply or not. So is there any other perspective for some in terms of is it worth doing or not? Because there is like the suitability, there are even some questions about the suitability for domain-driven design in certain contexts. But so from your perspective, what do you think about? Is it worth it?
Uh, I think the intent of it is essential. So I'm not like I would take away, like for example, off the shelf stuff, right? Domain driven design is about designing system. And the premise is that you're designing it, you're building it from mostly from scratch or something similar, right? So you're in that domain. But I would say that even if you were writing a blog but not using the off the shelf thing, then it is still applicable. But going to the very basics, it's about the intent. The intent, in my view, of domain driven design is that reveals intent part of the four rules of simple design, or it's, or the, you can even talk about metaphor in XP and so on, because what it is actually, what you're trying to do is you're trying to reveal. So one aspect, if you just look at it from a code perspective, you're trying to make sure that what you are representing the code is actually the it aligns very well with the real world of what the problem that this solution is for, right? So the two are well aligned, and you can understand it. By understanding the problem, you can then reason about the solution. So that intent, I think, is great. um, there are some aspects of domain driven design which I think are about exploring the problem space, which I also love. So this is the strategic aspect, and maybe we can later even describe the strategic and the tactical aspect of domain-driven design. So to me, the strategic aspect of domain-driven design is about problem exploration, understanding the problem, understanding the domain itself, and the tactical aspect is a very prescriptive view on what the solution should be or how the solution should be structured, right?
I think
And to
that's a
me,
better way of putting, yeah.
yeah. And to me, I think that part, and I think Eric Evans in the end as well downplayed that, even though it was the biggest part of the book. And although it said first half, I think it was very big, the first half of the book. But to me, I personally, like, I would like stick my neck out and not say it depends. I would say the problem exploration through the domain driven design methods, or it's a domain driven design strategic model, is a very good method for problem exploration. strategic part. The domain-driven design tactical part is not worth the effort.
I'm not sure
So
if I
half and half.
see. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not sure if I see it like that. So I mean, I agree with a lot of things, but the way I see it, every system, regardless of how complex, they need to be reasoned about. They need to be explored. You need to design them. How far you go in the design and the complexity of the design that you use will vary according to the complexity of what you are uh, uh, analyzing, or according to the complexity of the system. But it's also a mistake to think that systems are consistent in their complexity. For example, oh, this system is very complex, this system is very simple. Quite often it's not the case. Systems have areas that they are very complex and areas that are simpler. So quite often you have those kind of things. And there is a concept. I don't. I might be using the wrong name. If there is a domain-driven design expert in the channel, there you can correct the name. But I think that they call it. I think that it's called generic subdomains. I even put a note in there because I wanted to remember that name. I don't like the name. So for me, like I like to discuss about support domain and core domain. And the distinction that I make, and this normally happens to almost every system. So systems have a specific reason to exist, right? So when someone is sponsoring a software project, they have a specific need that they want to satisfy. And the system will provide certain behaviors for whoever is using that, being users or other systems. But as part of that system that we are building, some areas will be a support domain, and some area are the core domain, the reason that the system exists. An example, just to clarify my point, take a I don't know, Amazon, right? So there are features that are, you need to create a profile, you need to update your address, you need to have a potential, I don't know, like a wish list. Those things, they don't make you need to have an area probably used not by a user like me, but probably used by someone internally to update, to add products to be bought by someone like me. So there are probably a bunch of CRUDs at the back that someone will populate with products, with other things, with pricing and stuff. So there will be some things that are very simple to implement, and it doesn't make the system unique. Amazon is not Amazon because they have a shopping cart, a wish list, or a profile management. But they have core features in terms of their logistics, in terms of their recommendation, in how fast they can get a product to your house. And that includes a lot of integrations with multiple systems, warehouses, delivery companies, and whatever. So that's what makes their operational side superior, and the amount of integration with products, the amount of products that they can sell and store and deliver, and all of that has software behind. So what I'm trying to say is that the degree of design and analysis that you do in certain areas, on the core areas, are far bigger than in some support. That's how I qualify support domain and core domain. And those things need to be, you need to calibrate the amount of design and analysis and exploration according to the complexity of the domain. But it doesn't need to be a single thing that every system, oh, is it too simple or too complex? I think there's more nuance than that.
But I think that in is but what we are saying here, I think anything you build bespoke, whether it's sport or core, you should model well. There is an argument we had on whether you should be building. I think this goes back to the worldly thing as well, like what should be custom and what should be commodity. And commodity, you're buying from somewhere, you're not building it, or you reusing whatever someone else has built, and of course you don't need to model it. So you can kind of put the argument, or I'm assuming what you're saying is that you can put the argument in that way, is that the core domain is the thing you be custom building, and others are either integrations or so on, but you're not building those things from scratch, and so you don't need to model them because you're not into their complexity, although they might themselves be very complex. And to build those, if they were they are what's not core to you is core to someone else, and they, modeling it at well is of course a good thing to do if you're building it from scratch.
Clarifying what I said, I think that like you will calibrate the amount of design effort and and techniques according to the size of your problem, right? And the importance of your problem. That's what I was saying. And for me, domain-driven design is a good body of knowledge, but it's just one, not the only one. It is a body of knowledge that has a lot of good design principles at different levels. And you can use, so for example, I have a love and hate relationship with domain-driven design, not because of the body of knowledge itself, but normally see the implementations of it. Quite often, it's difficult to blame the tool. Like many, even methodologies and stuff like that. Quite often, like we see bad implementations or overused or bad use of those things. And
would you consider the tactical model as an implementation of domain-driven design, or as domain-driven
no?
design
So I
itself?
think that even the tactical model that I actually happen to know well, it's a guideline. It's almost like patterns in a way. I say, look, if you want to model at low level, so when you talk about tactical, we are going down to a much lower level of design. We are talking about classes and groups of classes, right? That's when we start
Like
talking
design
about
patterns, like
exactly,
the
in a
Gang of Four
way.
design patterns.
Exactly. There are not enterprise patterns. There are more local patterns, like at the class level patterns, right? So for me, this is what they are. They say, look, if you're modeling classes as part of your domain, there are 8 type of classes that Eric Evans defined that any kind of behavior or data might might be one of those types. So if you are in doubt about what this thing that you are trying to write, to code is, there are 8 things that I define in here. 5 are data and 3 are behavior, like the 3 services, like application, domain, and infrastructure, and the 5 data that is entity, value object, aggregate, repository, and factory. So they say, look, those are building blocks. Whatever you are trying to code, it might fit one of those building blocks. And
But
that's
that's not how they usually. That's not how it's usually applied. The
no.
reason I
So
say that is because it's like with design patterns. People you see design patterns everywhere once people read the book of the Gang of Four. And the same
exactly.
problem you have with the tactical model is that once they've got an aggregate, they want the services, they want the value objects, they want it's like a
Exactly.
gateway drug. Any one of them, and then your design just explodes into all the others. And
But
this
but
is
but
a
then
good
sorry, and
thing.
there is an
no,
sorry,
just sorry, but then, like, we can argue, for example, there is a set of patterns, not only the Gang of Four, but many other patterns. Even the early days of the enterprise Java patterns, like the J2E that had the whole enterprise patterns in the early days. They are a body of knowledge. This is how I qualify them. They are a body of knowledge, and then you can see, like, first, I would rather have them, know them, and make an informed decision of not to use them than not to have anything to base designs on. But then, of course, like for people that are more inexperienced, they will do that. They will learn a new shiny tool. They just read a book and stuff. They discovered CQRS or event sort or whatever, and say, now I want to apply it because I just learned it and I find it's cool. I want that experience. But I still struggle to criticize the body of knowledge in a way.
No, I'm
but
not criticizing the board. In a way, I am, because I think that the 8 building blocks, they kind of simplify. Sorry, Jose, just quick answer. They kind of simplify they lead developers, especially inexperienced developer, to think that here is a recipe, apply that, and you'll end up with good design. And it's often blindly followed, and part of the blame has to be laid at the methodology. It's not just the junior developer's fault. It's also the cell that this has in making them believe that it's religiously apply the technical model of the domain driven design and will end up with good design. In fact, it's almost the opposite if you do that, right? That's the part that actually irks me. But sorry,
Yeah,
Jose.
yeah. I'll let Jose speak because he's trying to speak for a while.
no, it's fine. I find myself agreeing with some points on both sides, let's say. But my point is, what is the benefit that you will get? For me, that's, we discussed that at the beginning. Like, are you going to get a benefit from thinking in that way, either to explore the problem, with the strategic patterns, or whatever, or giving you some sort of patterns to follow if you're going into the tactical ones? If you're not, and the example that I was saying before, when I was mentioning, buying something off the shelf and so on, for me it's the same. Because when I buy something off the shelf, yeah, what I'm saying is, okay, someone already defined that stuff for me, whatever ubiquitous language, whatever structure they wanted to define to model this problem that I'm trying to solve, yeah, and I'm okay with that. I don't care, for it to be exactly what I, how I think about this, because it will cover 90% of my problems, and then maybe I can go and customize it and change whatever. But that's a decision that I'm making at that point, and I think that's you know, it is an informed decision in that sense, right? And that's what I mean when you're buying something, or when you're using a library, and when you're adopting these things. The problem is, a lot of the times you do that without knowing that you're making that trade-off. Yeah. And that is what I see as an issue with something like that. And the other extreme, no, which is I will design everything from scratch myself, I also think it's not a good. No, someone was saying, no, it's a blog is not a business. Well, who knows, right? Like that's not entirely correct. Whether I need to customize it because my business is super special, and then I need to do some stuff, that's fine, but it's not. It doesn't matter, right? Like, I don't have to build it from scratch. However, I agree, you need to be able to think and reason about it, and this will give you tools. But in the end, it's not the other thing is, like, we've been doing software for a very long time. DDD is not the only way, and this is the other thing. Like, a lot of the things that you mentioned, like services, repository, etc., they were not invented with DDD. You know what I mean? So it's not. I I Renuente, no, I don't feel okay, no, with just following whatever it is that the methodology or the body of knowledge is telling you to do
But as I
blindly,
said, like
basically.
I don't think that like again I read the blue book 3 times, and I mind mapped half of it, the tactical part, and it talks about what those things are, and say, look, if you want to model, normally your class, whatever you're trying to write, will probably fall into one of those categories in here. It doesn't prescribe how you map them, because this is part of the complexity. It doesn't tell you, for example, how much, how big an aggregate should be, or exactly what behavior goes where and how you do that. It's like, those are building blocks. It's exactly what the name says. But then, of course, those building blocks are heavily based on, it was written in 2004, is very object oriented. So, for example, you will not be able to model uh, using tactical building blocks a functional application, or a modern architecture, for example, with serverless and all this kind of stuff. It will look very odd to use those building blocks if you are not using certain programming languages or even patterns as well. So it also talks about, is aligned to separation of concerns. Domain-driven design in the original one was very based on the 3-tier architecture. And that was also coming from the MVC and the separation of, let's keep the infrastructure and views and stuff separate from your core domain and stuff. And hexagonal architecture was a good fit in there because it still kept the domain protected. I personally don't like hexagonal architecture too much today as I used to. But there was a question from German. There's a lot of stuff going on the chat in there. One of the question was, is DDD similar to something? DDD a bunch of design patterns? DDD equals a hexagonal architecture? No, for me, DDD is a body of knowledge. Is a body of knowledge about software design, as we have patterns, and patterns can be at different levels, from low-level patterns like Gang of 4 to architectural patterns like potentially like CQRS and event sourcing. They are serverless architecture. For me, they are more architectural patterns. But there are, for example, there's clean architecture. That is another body of knowledge that is in the same level of domain-driven design on the tactical side. That is interaction-driven design. That is the same level as well. And there are many other There are solid principles, another thing. So there is design by contract, that is another thing. So those are all different design guidelines. They are not as far as a methodology. So some of them are like clean architecture is a bit more. What Bob did with clean architecture, he connected those building blocks. He was a bit more prescriptive in how he would assemble some of those building blocks. Eric Evans doesn't do that with the building blocks. He just say like those are building blocks. That's where you could put behavior if you want.
The word actual building blocks actually says that they are a unit of build, right? So like
Yes.
they are the material that you build everything else with, right?
Yes, and they are one level above the classes themselves.
Yeah, they're design patterns, and the way he did them is that this is the set of design patterns, and you can use them to build any software, right? And I know that they don't that it, and it is object oriented, but like I also have a love-hate relationship, and I don't like the tactical model because I personally think that it is prescriptive, not in the sense that like telling you in lots of different ways how the solution should be built, but saying that these are the different things, all the things that you're gonna need to build your system, right? And to me, that actually creates a lot of complexity in the system when it shouldn't be there, because people just go on to them and because, oh, is this an aggregate, is this a value object, is this and that, rather than really thinking about some of the different concerns in software design. To me, like the four rules of simple design, like coupling and cohesion, those kind of a bit more things that they're less prescriptive and more about the quality that you're trying to get. And I
Can
know,
help you evaluate whatever it is that you're writing, what you're writing, whether it follows or not the guidelines. It allows you to evaluate how well does it fit with what you're trying to
they are
accomplish, which is
heuristics.
the
They're heuristics about how you can evaluate your design, and not what the design itself is, right? And that's why I like that separation. I don't like that prescriptive aspect, because I think it can lead to like square pegs in round holes type situations. But
So
let me, I think,
and you're talking about the Evans book, but there is the implementing them in
yeah,
design and the distill
yeah.
one, which I think are very prescriptive.
But I'm kind of staying
So
with the Eric Evans book,
exactly.
to be honest,
So
for now.
you're talking about the
Otherwise-
body of knowledge, but focusing on
yeah.
the Evans book and
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't read the green one. I read the implementing one by von Vernon, and I thought, like, again, like, I'm not here to criticize the work of individuals. I can only say like things that I like using or not. I think that he went in more prescriptive, but the problem with the lack of prescription, mainly when we remove any prescription, we just go back to basic principles. You need a lot of experience just to take very basic and abstract principles and design a software and decide what behavior goes where and how you're going to split your software and stuff. So you need a lot of experience to do that.
So
And
splitting the software is different part, and that is actually, I like domain-driven design, but I think that is the strategic model.
no, but the split happens at multiple levels, right? So it happens all the way from services to what you put in a method.
No,
right?
no,
The
it does.
splitting
It
happens
does.
at
But
all
I
levels.
think the important part, the split where split should be taught, is at the levels where you are creating domain boundaries.
Right. So
Right.
if we did a better job at explaining coupling and cohesion, that is for
Yeah.
me is the root. For me, the centerpiece, like that everything in software design and architecture, at the root you have, at the center you have coupling and cohesion. If you understand
Yeah.
that very well, and all
Really.
the variances of like all the different how can I say areas of coupling, because coupling, I always say coupling and cohesion are not binary concepts. It's not that it's coupled or not coupled or cohesive, not cohesive. No, there is a multiple facets of coupling, multiple facets of cohesion, and they are in a spectrum, each one of them, right? So, so ultimately it's going down there, but you need to have a lot of experience to know things at a very deep level so that you can learn those concepts and be able to apply with no guideline, with just that foundational knowledge to apply. So we can move on from the tactical, because as we said, the tactical will fall apart and it's not the core piece. I think that, and just finish on the von Vernon thing, I think that because of the amount of confusion, and even sometimes with lack of prescription, not in terms of the building blocks, but how to assemble them. and assemble bigger parts, because even the tactical side in the blue book, you talk about the bounded context, but you don't really define how you decide how much behavior go into each context. So what von Vernon trying to do is to try to give some direction to avoid the monstrosities that we've seen built following domain-driven design. But then in order to do that, he had to become more prescriptive. And then it also falls short into other areas, because if you don't comply to certain
but that's
areas,
fine.
that
Again, some
prescription will not apply.
prescription is fine, especially if you're learning. It's like the Shuhari kind of journey, no? Like first do this, no, and then you can start straying, moving away from that. No, that's fine. It's not an issue. Should we move on to other things that are also
Yeah.
related to DDD that
Yeah.
are not only no? Because
By the way, can we just like I didn't think you guys are mentioning CQRS or especially event sourcing as part of domain-driven design. I'd like to know more because I didn't. I mean, I didn't consider them as part of domain-driven design.
So what are the way I see this is, as domain-driven design evolved, right? So there was the first book in 2004, and then and even Martin Fowler wrote the forward to the Eric Evans book. So it got a lot of attention, let's say, by a lot of people, and the domain-driven design community grew in many countries and stuff, and more people came in and start adding, well, saying, look, we need a little bit more things. For example, one of the bigger additions was another building block. For example, events are today considered a building block in domain-driven design. If you look at the newer books of domain-driven design, events is one of the building blocks. And as we had more modern architectures, so people start talking more about architecture as well. And Greg Young was one of the people that was always around the domain-driven design community, and Alberto Brandolini. So Alberto Brandolini created the event storming. That is a way to analyze domain and help to popularize events as part of a building block. But then Greg Young also, that was always in the conferences, he started talking about CQRS and event sourcing on those conferences. And that became like an architectural pattern that was, I wouldn't say that it's part of the domain design, but it's an architectural style that is very common within the domain-driven design community, similar to event storming. It's not part of DDD,
especially
but it's
with
yeah,
especially with microservices coming into the picture, and
exactly.
everyone wanted to know, so they combine very well, no? And
Yeah.
once you have those separate bounded context and all this stuff, and you want to start sending messages to each other and so on, then
I
it
personally
Because
don't think
there
that.
is
comes into
no,
the
There
picture.
might be, I don't know the history of event sourcing, but I find it very difficult to relate it to domain-driven design because event sourcing, the key concept in event sourcing is not related to domain. Well, I mean, of course, events can be modeled as domain events and those kind of things, right? But they it's not directly related to domain-driven design, in my view. I don't know the history behind it, so I can't say, but I find it very difficult to connect. And CQRS, in my view as well, is about separating the commands
commands and
and
queries.
queries and so on. So again, I don't know how they connect to, like, I'm taking a very purist view of domain-driven design, which is like kind of things that pushed out from Eric Evans, right? And I'm not sure that event sourcing or CQRS was a direct result of Eric Evans' work. That's why I
No,
don't
no,
think
no,
it's part of
no, no.
domain-driven design.
So again, maybe there are some people from the DDD community that are, but like my understanding is, as domain-driven design became more and more popular, the communities grew, more and more people start having conferences and stuff. So what they were adding to the body of knowledge, because for example, domain-driven design, as far as I understand, when we talk about bounded context and context mapping, we don't go all the way to architecture. We don't go all the way to microservices and how we deploy those things. It's more like about the separation. And I don't even think that is great. By the way, I think that it talks about how the bounded context, the kind of relationship that the bounded contexts have with each other, if it's a shared kernel or whatever, like the consumer and whatever it is. I forgot now about all the different types of relationships, but it doesn't tell you how you actually define the amount of behavior within a bounded context, and let alone how you deploy. And I think that so as the community evolved, they had to apply that into modern architectures using cloud and all those things. So architectural concepts start coming in and say, look, we need, because what happened when you think about, I was discussing that a few years ago in a conference, and in the past, domain-driven design, well, we would design a monolith, right? So back in the day, our applications were monolith. So microservice, like in 2004, were not a thing. We were still talking about probably enterprise server buses and stuff like that. As we start breaking the deployables into smaller services, this created a kind of a tension within domain-driven design. Because now, if you think about, if your services are very small and they don't have a lot of behavior inside, your domain modeling moves to architectural level. So you're now modeling services. So you're not modeling just now local classes anymore. So the way that you do, for example, persistence, and for example, in the past, what we would do, because this is what I think that create a big tension in there, because in the past, entities and aggregates are the root of the domain model. In terms of domain-driven design, I'm not giving my opinion if I like or dislike, but people would model their entities and aggregates. As you distribute your systems and your services become much smaller, that entity relationship management that we had, like each entity had a one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, and all this kind of stuff, where everything was connected. Now they are all distributed. So modeling, so the entities had there was a tension in there, because now everything was distributed. So you had to model much smaller services with far less entities connected. And these had triggers like, look, why don't we split those things? And that's when architectural patterns had to evolve. Domain-driven design had to adapt to a new demand in terms of architecture and scalability and so on and so forth. Before, everything was stateless, big application. That's how it started. But that's why those things were incorporated, events, and then that led
The domain events were incorporated. I know they were part of domain design, but the event sourcing itself was. I mean, I know that they were like. I agree that but I'm just that it came from the same community. But the part that I'm still skeptical about is whether the two are, if the two are part of the same body of knowledge. I think they are.
let's say they are not. They didn't derive. They are more that are in the work from
Complementary.
independent people.
Yeah.
That are being put together for certain communities, like similar, like maybe it's a horrible analogy, but it's almost like craftsmanship. We like to talk about XP. And there are things that we bring very close to us because we feel that are very aligned and stuff. So some architectural patterns, hexagonal architecture was created by Alistair Coburn, like in I think late 90s, and became a good thing for it because it protects the domain. Before, when domain-driven design was written, we were talking about layered application, but hexagonal architecture was easily adopted because it was
adopted, and that's what I mean. That, for example, event sourcing can exist without domain-driven design, and so can hexagonal architecture as well.
Totally.
And I think that's what. I would like to take the conversation to something that I do like about domain-driven design. So, for example, like domain, it's like I might be seeming quite skeptical of domain-driven design. I am not. I'm skeptical of the tactical model, but I am actually very much for the strategic model. I think it's a good set of tools for problem analysis, and I like problem analysis. I think the more emphasis we can put on that, the better it does. And I don't know, maybe we should discuss the strategic aspect of domain-driven design a bit more in the next.
The strategic side. I don't know. I'm not up to date. I must confess with the new. The most recent book or books in domain-driven design. But like in the strategic side, they were talking about context mapping and bounded context in general. Of course, the ubiquitous language is a thread that runs across tactical and strategic. But like from what I remember, like in terms of context mapping and bounded context, they talk about the relationship between them. So, for example, dependencies. Like if you change one bounded context, do you need to change the other one? So what is the order? Who triggers the change? Who is the master? I forgot exactly the right terminology.
Yeah, you got
Upstream and downstream and no.
yeah, upstream, downstream.
Yeah,
You've got anti-corruption layer in there as
there is
well.
an anti-corruption
You've got
layer.
the two together. I've got the name for it. The two together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but
so,
yeah,
so there is this relationship. I think I have it in here now. Separate weights, open host service, conformist, customer supplier teams, shared kernel, and things like that. So I personally find that it's at the before I knew anything, this was a good knowledge because I didn't have that knowledge. I didn't think about that. The kind of the strength of the relationship, if you like, the power balance, if you like, between those bounded contexts. This is what he talks about. But when we do our job, for example, we go to a client or any person like listening to this conversation. So you are in a software team and you need to sit down with the business, and we need to understand what the business is about so that you can architect your system. You need to decide what would be my bounded contexts and what I'm going to deploy together, what I'm deploy separate, and what's the relationship. I don't think that in that book has enough information for people to make that decision well. So, for example,
The Evans book is what you're talking about now.
I'm talking about the Evans book. I don't know
Okay.
exactly what von Vernon did in that area, or if there is more work in that area that becomes more prescriptive, or not prescriptive, but has better guidelines. But I can give you quite a few examples. When we do that modeling, when we sit down with different stakeholders to understand what the bounded contexts are, we take multiple perspectives. One perspective is what are the different actors that are gonna be interacting with the system, and what are the main journeys that they will have. As I mentioned in the previous examples from Amazon, me as a customer, I will have one type of journey or a few types of journeys, and I will interact with certain bounded contexts. I will find a product, add to my shopping basket, I will try to pay them, and so on and so forth. There might be other people, other actors that will interact with the system in a different way. They will add products to the system, they will calculate price, they will decide which products are available in each country, and so on and so forth. So this is one perspective. What are the actors? What are their jobs? There's nothing to do with domain-driven design. Another perspective, data ownership. Which bounded, because the data, like who owns each piece of data? What do I mean by ownership? Who can change? Which service can change certain data? But those services don't just operate with that data. They probably need data from other services as well, or they submit data to other services. So that definition of data ownership is a different perspective. There are regulations or compliance. For example, certain areas of your system, they need to be more secure, or they need to be under certain regulations, like a payment system and PCI compliance and stuff like that. And I can go on forever. So those are multiple perspectives that we need to use to define bounded context and decide the coupling between them, how talkative those domain contexts are. If they're very talkative, you probably want to deploy them together. If they're less talkative, you probably want to deploy them separately. So all operational requirements, some others you need to scale more than others. So all of that are guidelines, are design guidelines for bounded context that, as far as I'm aware, they don't exist in the original work, and I'm not quite sure if they exist on the following work. So strategic wise, I think that is still not there.
I think the
Sorry,
the concept of it's not there, but the concept, it's a higher level concept, is actually very important. And ubiquitous language, although runs through both tactical and strategic, it is part of strategic. And the reason I like um, the the idea, and it was one of the first time that this idea was well described, is that your system is made up of a bunch of subsystems that are loosely coupled and highly cohesive. And it goes back to that coupling and cohesion. And all the things that you described are then actually a talk. They are perspective on that. How you like what level of cohesion and what kind of coupling and all those kind of things, right? And they did try to make some a kind of uh, some kind of let's say guidance on talking about the relationship between components. And I thought that was very important as well. And the idea of a language that is a the idea of the bounded context and the language that is applicable within that bounded context, I thought was also a very strong idea. Now, of course, these things already existed. They just put names to the things that were already there in a lot of ways. But I felt that those are the things that I still use in my, like, if I was to reason about systems and so on, I would still use them. Of course, the way you design them, so on, and you kind of over time you learn through experience on on other knowledge that you bring to bear. But the reason that I like the strategic model is because it made these aspects of problem analysis very popular. It made kind of aligning on the language within a context, that thing popular, the context map popular, these things. And I like it because of that, and I still use it. And I think that's why I have that's what I mean by the love hate relationship I have with domain driven design, is that it, for me, like my journey in design, software design, this is the first time I came across problem analysis in a bit more structured way than what universities and other things taught you. This was better than entity relationship modeling or verbs and nouns and all those kind of things. This was more strategic, let's say. And I think that has grown, and really understanding that and using that is actually, it's one of those things that there is no harm in teaching that at whatever level. There is harm in teaching tactical level without deep understanding, but there's no harm in teaching that, because I wouldn't say that people would make messes just because they did that part. I think they would end up with slightly better things if they only did that's my point of view on the strategic design side of things.
I want
Definitely not,
to
but a good set of tools.
I wanted to throw in, because you were talking again about the book, no, and how much guidance does he give there in order to take that to practice. And one thing that is very popular as well is the event storming workshops, and which for me is a tool for discovery of how that would look like. Yeah. And it's a bit of a hybrid between some of the things that you mentioned on the perspective of the actor, and then no, or customer journey or service blueprint, because again, a lot of these things are not new. They're not new or
Not new.
unique
They're not new.
to this thing,
But
right?
that's
Like
okay. We stand on
we're
shoulders of
cross
giants.
pollinating a lot here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But basically, I do see it as a very good tool to discover. And again, using some of these concepts, think about your problem space, and then how you want to split things, and what makes sense to put together or not, and what is. But just because you have events, no, doesn't mean that you need to use events.
I was
You know
gonna
what I
say
mean?
exactly that, because any project that starts with event sourcing, although I like event sourcing a lot as a problem exploration tool, right? Not event sourcing, event storming. Sorry,
And so,
every project that starts with event storming, often I see ends up with an event-based
accidental
system that is
complexity.
overly
Exactly.
complicated.
Exactly, with a lot of stuff that you didn't need for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
this
So
really drives me crazy, right? So I know Alberto Brandolini well, and I think that event storming is a great technique. But I was reading in the chat, and I know that some people really like it and stuff. But this is the difference, right? So event storming for me is a fantastic technique, as you said, Jose, to explore new domains. So I like the idea of saying, look, we know that we need to build something, but we are not quite clear exactly what or how and stuff. No, not how, but more what, right? So what when this happens, what should happen? Or if this happened, it happened because of what? And we start creating this sequence of events, but not code events. Events, business events, right? So this should happen, and then maybe this user will do that, and then they will do that, and then this should happen, and this should happen. So keeping at that level, exploring the product, the software, the kind of capabilities that we want to provide to the external world. So that is great. And I think there is a great technique, as many others, as we have like what is it, value stream mapping, as we
Sequence
have like
diagram.
perspective,
Sequence diagram.
right? Sequence. So as you have tons of other tools to discuss domains or explore and stuff like that. The problem is, because event storming is so cool in order to figure out, is a very nice way to discuss with the business and get them engaged to talk about the business, the domain, what should happen after, and once this happens, what should happen next, and blah blah blah, and before that, what should have happened before that, and so on. So this is a very cool way to guide a workshop and get the information that you need. The problem is, now you have all those events before and after, the actions and all this kind of stuff, and then people go and create one event. They create that in code, and then now you have like an application that is deployed in the same deployable units, right? So a single application that has loads of events. We have like classes that you wrote them all. They are all belong to you. You create them all, but they don't talk to you. They don't. You cannot instantiate a class and call a method. No. I need to create an event bus internally through code and throw an event so that another class that subscribes to it with classes that I own within the same domain. How on earth does this make sense to anyone, that you would have domain on a synchronous call with classes under the same deployable, right? So normally, like, this should be an architectural pattern, use queues and connect servers and stuff. No. And then you have all this accidental complexity for absolutely no reason whatsoever. It's just say instantiate a bloody class, call a method in there, and get done with it.
It does, just like, yeah, of course it makes sense across services, and it makes sense in the front end as well, where rendering is an issue. But yeah, you're trying to solve a technical problem. But yeah, not when it comes, calling one method can call another that's built into your language. Don't reinvent function invocation.
Yeah. Because now you add all those layers of abstraction, and events is one of the kind of like the most how can I say, when you take coupling to the most decoupled way. You throw an event and you don't even know who is going to consume, or when you consume you don't even know who sent. So but that creates such a level of indirection that is almost impossible for you to track the system. And then you have an application that is all deployed together and you cannot trace what's happening in the bloody application. So one thing is to do across services, but like within classes, within the same memory space, I see, absolutely. But then the problem is not event sourcing. Oh, sorry, event storming. This is the problem. The problem is, I don't think that the problem is domain-driven design or event storming or CQRS. The problem is that obsession that people have when they learn a new tool and they start blindly applying, right? So I would not use event storming to model my system. I would use event storming to run very good workshops with the business so that we all understand what needs to be done. But I will take that information and then I will model my system properly. That's what I normally prefer.
One more thing that I would say is, like, if you're coming in new, no, because this I've also seen, no, we want to apply the everywhere. We're coming in here. Let's run workshops and like, it can be seen because you're discovering, but you're the only one that's kind of discovering. No, so everyone's already aware of what that domain is. Everyone is aware of how things work. They may not have it documented in the same way, yeah, but the knowledge is there, and you triggering this can be seen as a waste of time, basically, because again we're doing something. I mean, we're not going to be, and we're not going to end up implementing that particularly. No, we're okay. It's good to understand each other, but when are we gonna start writing the stuff that we need to get done for real? And this is another thing there that plays against it as well. And although it's great, you can run workshops, etc., when are we gonna deliver? Which is kind of important in most cases, no?
There is one thing that I find in event storming is although it's problem analysis, is using certain design tools for it, and it leads people to less experienced people towards thinking that they already have software design. It's exactly the same problem with the tactical model of domain driven design. Leads people towards thinking the design work for their software is done. They just have to follow that formula. The same problem with the gang of four patterns that leads people to think that they just have to put that pattern in and they've got good design. I think this is the problem, the thing that runs through them. And although we can blame people for not truly understanding the intent behind certain things, although gang of four is aside because it is very prescriptive and it tried to do something but it didn't really work. But there is some problem laid at the door of the methodology itself. There is some blame to be laid at the door of the methodology itself. Is that it, it's using design tools and it's asking them to it's almost giving you this formula, and it needs to be very clear that this is not the formula. It's not a formula, or it needs to be taught in a way that it's very clear that it's not a formula, because that then becomes the root of a lot of problems in software systems.
Yeah, but the clarity is very complicated because as soon as you release something that you find there are good guidelines within a context, like people will interpret this way, it's very difficult to have control because like we know very well, like we can read exactly the same piece of news on a newspaper and come up with completely different opinions about that. And this is true for everything, right? So it's almost impossible for anyone that is sharing their knowledge and creating, it's like, look, I think this is a useful technique and that's how I use it, that's why I created it, and blah blah blah. But it's almost impossible to control how the
How people are
Chinese
going to
whispers, right? Because
how people, and some of the most some yeah and some of the clever people, some of the cleverest people get it wrong, because like if I look at the gang of four patterns, it came out of the language I think it was called a language for patterns by Christopher Alexander. And and from there they came up with, like, they were impressed by that and came up with the gang of four patterns. But Christopher Alexander itself later, because a few people tried it in different places, and not just in software development, and he said himself, he said, I'm talking about a language for patterns to be designed using the problem context, not a generic language that exists outside the problem context. And then, so not just a bunch of patterns for any problem. It's a bunch of problem for specific problems.
but but, but,
Patterns for
but this
specific.
is what they are, right? So the patterns, they start with the problem domain, and so this is the problem, this is the common problem that we find. This is a common solution for a common problem. They
No,
are
but
very,
see that at the level that he's talking about, Christopher Alexander talks about the domain itself. So the problem that he means is actually a problem at the higher level, not the not the piecemeal problem, not this problem, this solution, this problem, this solution, but he's talking about the overall problem.
yeah,
So
but I
that's
think
where,
that just
that
cheap
was his
approach.
criticism of the thing. He's
Sure.
talking about the domain itself. Like if we're building a system for this thing, he calls that the problem,
But if
not
you
the application.
just keep knowledge at that level, it will be very difficult to share knowledge because, like, I think that is useful to have like at least while you are learning, you saying, look, if you want to do something like I don't know, like you want to create a complex kind of object graph. You know what? There are a few creational patterns that you might choose from that might be good for your solution. If you want to see what I'm saying, so there
No,
are.
I agree with the learning argument, by the way, but we are not learning. We are. I agree when you're talking about training, when you're talking about
It's not only
katas, when you're
that.
talking about those things, we that argument I agree in there. Yes, of course, like these kind of patterns to practice over, I agree. But when they appear in real life production systems, That's not a place to be learning.
I have a lesson, for example, like if we talk about sorting algorithms, right? So some people thought deeply about them and stuff, and then it's like you need to implement a sort. Yeah, like don't try to come up with the whole math in your head and what would be the log n or whatever that is and stuff and
I,
how.
I think that's a different thing. So
No, it's
sorting
not.
out there
It's
are
the same.
generic problems and generic solutions.
No,
They're
no, it's
not
a common
specific.
solution to problems. So within sorting, you can have all those different types of solutions that you can apply, and they perform in different ways. Or for those, when you are creating certain things, those are patterns. And when you are designing database, you can use these and stuff like that. So I think that having that body of knowledge that you can go to for simple things that are common across every system is not a bad thing. The thing is when we cannot discern when to use certain tools or techniques or workshops and stuff in the right place. This is for me a slightly different, but I don't have a problem with having this body of knowledge, because otherwise we are always trying to go to very high level concepts and we need to recreate that. We cannot build on top of anything in there. So for example, we discussed about patterns today and domain-driven design or clean architecture or hexagonal, because like someone thought, like in this context, if you want to protect your design, your domain, you can invert a dependency and use hexagonal architecture. Great, this is a principle. You can use that. Doesn't mean that you need to or you should, but there is a guideline if that you have that kind of problem. The problem is like I want to use whatever, like in a context that is, but I like having that body of knowledge. We just need to do a better job in teaching them where to apply and having discussions like this one and say, look, we like this bit, we dislike this bit. This is where I would use this is where I would not use this. But I like that we have those body of knowledges available to us.
No, this is what I'm saying. That then my problem with my problem with the technical model of domain-driven design is not that it exists. My problem is that it is arranged as a set of things that's all you're gonna need to build good software. That is my problem. Whether that was probably not intended or not, that's how it's perceived, and that's my problem with it.
But then you can but this is where I struggle with, because like I like the idea that people go out and share and say, look, I do this kind of work very often, and given the kind of work that I do very often, and I try different approaches, I think that this is a good approach to tackle that. So, and I should encourage that to happen more often. But when people take that experience, that knowledge, and they misapply, either because they misunderstood or they applied in a different context, I would be very careful not to criticize the body, because like one thing is just someone categorically say, look, you know what, guys, this is the thing. Software design is resolved. That problem doesn't exist anymore because I have the definite set of tools and you don't need anything else regardless of what to do. I will have a big issue with that. Mm-hmm. No doubt. I believe that not only me, but everyone else will try to poke holes in it and destroy that. Mm-hmm. But when someone comes in and say, look, this is what I do it very often. In this context, I think this is a good idea. And by the way, guys, you can use it if you want. I'm just sharing knowledge with you. I can teach you. I can run some trainings. If they want to make money on top of their own creations, I have no issues with it. People may decide if they want to pay or not. But this is this is
no,
what
I agree with that. By the way, I'm not like, for example, I'm not criticizing Eric Evans for writing what he did, and I think Jose Yare is saying that he doesn't arrange it as a thing that he's showing that these are the things that you can use. And that's what I'm trying to say is my problem is not with the author itself, but the way that it then goes across and the way that it's adopted. And this is like, at least at the time, I've not developed for a while, but at the time when I was really into domain-driven design and the tactical model and building it, I have seen many systems that are pure tactical domain-driven design systems. And because of that, they were poorer because of it. And I think
and people were very proud of them as well, because this is the other thing. Like, oh, did you see that?
And it's like the holy grail. Like, you cannot yeah, but this is how it is. This is what the book says. This is how, like, look, I'm using that, and this is, it's all a good thing. It's the adoption. So, like, it's not whether Eric Evans wrote it. I mean, I'm glad that he wrote it. It's the adoption. It's the kind of almost like this cargo cults that then appear at the off, and which we developers kind of are very susceptible to, and we create communities and dogmas around it. That's my problem.
And I agree with that. I know that we are kind of like into like an hour and five. We have a good engagement. We have quite a few people still interacting. There is one thing I would not like to introduce a new topic right now, because this is what Jose does and not me. But like, but there is one thing that I want to say, because I've been quite like, I have a love and hate relationship, but I've been quite soft in a way in this conversation. There is one thing, and there is a criticism on on domain-driven design, and mainly on the focus. I dislike, and I think that Geray has been talking about a bit of that on the chat about functional modeling and other things like that. So one thing that I dislike in domain-driven design is that I still feel, even with the domain events focus, I still feel that it's very entity aggregate, state-based centric. And I don't feel that, like, I don't like the idea of modeling my domain without knowing how it's going to be used from outside. And this is the issue, the main issue that I have with the vast majority of the body of knowledge. I like the idea of coming from outside. I like the idea of saying, like, how does the user or other systems want to use my system? And the domain model should evolve according to the external needs. Like, this is one of the reasons that I don't like hexagonal architecture today. I don't like the idea, like, let's create our pristine, our beautiful domain model that we discussed with the business and stuff. We know all the business rules, but we still don't know how it's going to be used from outside. And then once you discuss the outside and we discuss the API or the user journey, you feel that core domain doesn't fit precisely what you want. And then you build that horrendous layer of adapters to make sure that you can satisfy the external world. And I think that is a horrendous thing to do. I would rather, I'm a big adapter of outside-in design that comes with outside-in TDD and modeling behavior, which your code will become far more functional because you are now modeling behavior, not state. So it's like, what are the user journeys? What is the API? What are we providing to the external world? Let's start from there. Because if we don't know who is using the system and how they're using the system, why would we build anything at the back? And this is the main problem that I currently have. So I would define that first, and then only build and evolve my domain gradually in slices, in vertical slices, one feature at a time. And as I have more features coming to the same area of the domain, I would be evolving my domain. But for example, in this case, you would be modeling behavior, because every time that we discuss requirements with the business, either through requirement documents or user stories or whatever you do, it's always about a verb. As a user, I would like to verb. It's always about verbs, and we don't model verbs, we model state. And I think this is the issue that I have. I would rather model those things, make sure that I can see those behaviors. Like when I talk about the domain model, I don't want to see what my core entities are. I want to see what are the core features that are being delivered by this system. It's very different.
But that depends. That depends, because when you're doing event storming, but when you're doing event storming, because I don't know what you're thinking of exactly, but when you're doing event storming, you do have commands as well, right? Like you do have those actions
and in like direction, so TDD as well. It doesn't always depict it like that. You do your entities first, right? You can do your services first.
No, so
can be an API.
When you are talking about a lot of the domain modeling, the domain-driven design implementations, they will be talking about their aggregates. They're going to be talking about their bounded context and stuff. But we are not analyzing how those things are going to be used from outside. What is the interface of those aggregates? So those things they first define the general behavior, the business behavior. And this is what hexagonal architecture does. It protects your domain, and then you figure out how you're going to plug in the rest, both persistence
Well,
and the
arguably not, because you in even like hexagonal, you define your ports. Adapter is what you could think of, and ports are part of your domain,
Sure, but then what do you
part
do
of your core
first?
domain,
In order
right?
to
That,
define your
that is the interface.
Sure, but in order to define your ports and adapters, which direction do you come in? Do you come in from outside so that I understand what the outside wants, and then I create that interface to satisfy that,
Well,
and then I design the domain?
arguably, your API is your ports. Depends
Right,
on
but
at what level you're talking about hexagonal architecture as well, right?
well, so yes.
It depends.
Of
Depends.
course,
Trademark.
no, the reason I would say that is because like you might or might not be also building the front end, because this changes where the ports and adapters are. If you build both ends, I could agree with you that your ports and adapters are your API layers, because you are also building the front end and entire user journey and everything else. But you might just be providing an API that's going to be consumed by other systems and stuff. And that is slightly different. But you are still providing that API layer is providing the behavior that your system provides to the external world.
But I'm just playing the devil's advocate. But your front end could, I mean, not that I would advocate this, but the front end in domain-driven design could be another bounded context, right?
No, it's not. It's clearly not. It is completely separate. At least in the original book, they talk about the 3 tiers and separation of application, business, and persistence.
Yeah, but I thought we were talking about hexagonal just now.
No, sure. But what I'm trying to say, we were talking about hexagonal architecture. What I'm trying to say is, in domain-driven design, the front end and the way that they use hexagonal architecture, the front end is not another bounded context. It's just the delivery mechanism, as Uncle Bob prefers to call them in clean architecture. But that's a separate thing so your domain model is protected from your user interface and from your infrastructure and persistence and stuff, right?
Well,
so it's not a separate bounded context.
Sandro, going back again to event storming, there are actors represented there, and you do have that outside perspective of how people are going to be using the system.
Event
if you're
storming,
doing it
in event storming, I'm not talking about domain-driven design. I'm talking about event storming with a technique to explore domain. Yes, of course there is actors. You cannot do without.
But by the way, we should have another session on implementing domain-driven design. Because this is like, this conversation can go on for a long time, and I'm conscious we're like already 13 minutes in of overrun time.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, so I think we should try to wrap up.
Okay, so right, what are your final words, Mesh? Your considerations, your final considerations.
I mean, if the question, like, to answer the original question, is domain-driven design worth it? My personal view is that yes, it's worth it. I think the problem analysis part is very interesting, and you should look at it. And the tactical part, please don't use it as a recipe. If there are some good patterns in there, you can have a look at them. Although I'm not a fan of a lot of them, but there are patterns in there. But definitely don't try to think that they are then your database entities and those kind of things. That's quite a misnomer in there as well. But to answer the question, yes, domain-driven design is a good body of knowledge. If all you can do is to read the books and see the intent behind, not the solution itself, but the actual intent and how they try to describe the actual what problem that they're trying to, or Eric Evans is trying to solve. I think that in itself is a very worthy read, and you should definitely try to read it. Although it's difficult, it's a big book, but you should definitely try to read it.
It's boring as hell, that book.
It's
you
boring.
Just reminded me. You just reminded me of communism. Like a great idea, in theory, then implementation.
In theory, yeah. Don't let it corrupt you, basically. I think that's a very good analogy. Yeah, just like communism.
Let's wrap up before we go into the politics.
I'll stop at that.
So yeah, so on someone was asking about books. So definitely, I plus one to what Mike said on the read the Evans book. Like, if you don't have to do it all at once in one pass, but find a couple of chapters, like the one that Sandro was saying before, where it describes the relationship between bandit cultures, etc., etc. I think that one's interesting. Again, go through it at least in passing. It's good. There's also a new book from Bob Burnham, the strategic monoliths and microservices, I think it's called, or something like that, which I'm looking forward to take a look at, because supposedly it focuses on the strategic side of this. So maybe there's new stuff, and it's quite recent as well. So yeah, maybe we should check that out and have a second round at this.
Yeah, so for me, like the final considerations, like you heard, like the books are all the books in DDG by Von Vernon and Eric Evans. But so read them, learn the body of knowledge, and then make your own judgment, as we always say, right? So you cannot just start judging things when you don't really understand them deeply. But what I would say, my final words is, I like the idea of modeling behavior and focus my modeling in behavior and from the use of the external world. I think that my domain model should evolve given what we are trying to provide to the external world. And I would start always from that part and not just go to the center, start evolving a domain, and then try to figure out how it's going to be used. And I don't like this approach myself. So I prefer the outside in. I prefer a code that is more functional. I prefer that my entities and aggregates, this is a big issue that I have with domain-driven design. Instead of they being the centerpiece of my domain, how we start thinking, I prefer them to be almost like a functional code. They're just data structure. We need data to perform some operations, and they emerge from the operations that we are providing instead of being the centerpieces. So modeling behavior is much harder, but if you are able to do that, you see that your code will become far more functional as well. And I prefer that approach. I think it's more modern, more scalable, and you make you even like with TQRS and stuff like that, you see that the value of entities diminish and you focus more on data structures and behavior. I think this is more aligned to how we discuss behavior with the business as well, right? When we discuss what we need to build, we discuss exactly that: behavior and data that needs to be persisted or returned. I think that domain-driven design doesn't that model.
Data that needs to be received as well.
Yes, exactly. So this is far more aligned to how we analyze the problem domain than just having data as the centerpiece and then try to squeeze the behavior somewhere. So this is my preference, and that's why I have an issue sometimes with domain-driven design, or at least domain-driven design implementations that I've seen. I can put like that. Yeah.
Actually, what you're saying, Sandro, almost reminds me of the talk by Rick Hickey, the inventor of Clojure, or creator of Clojure, I should say. He's not inventor of Lisp at all. And the talk is called Simple versus Easy, or Simple Made Easy. Simple versus Easy, I think. And he talks about leaving data alone, which is a very different thing, but it's about the relationship between data and behavior as well.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent. Well, thanks everyone that are on the chat. Thanks for your contributions, and it was very funny. Like I had to hold my laugh like for some of the comments that you wrote in there. So it was very cool. Thanks for your questions and comments. And yes, we'll be here probably next week. We'll see. I'm on holidays next week, so we're still not sure, but like let's see how it goes. Thank you everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.